if there is one thing that a TA can do or a faculty member to improve their teaching experience and their students' learning experience, it's to get creative, to get good at getting feedback. So you have a handout, I think, that just frames some of the categories, right? The last slide there, maybe?
The end of your packet.
Yeah. So let me grab that real quick.
The last page of agenda 1.
So what we just modeled on that last page of the workshop packet 2, we just modeled the way CTL would run a small group evaluation. As I say, at the bigger picture, you might want to be thinking about other options. TAs can also request to have online mid-quarter evaluations that CTL can run. They can go to our website and request and get an online evaluation. There are pros and cons to these. The pro in the small group evaluation is students are talking to each other. They're working toward consensus. A TA does not need 75 things to change in week 5 of a term. They need 2 or 3 things to change that might be changeable, and 2 or 3 things to remind themselves that they're doing well and is working, and that's a great outcome. So when you put students in small groups, the outcome is they talk to each other. In some classes, they don't talk to each other much. This is actually an opportunity to do that. They get to consensus. The really kind of outlier people, if there's somebody who just thinks this is just a terrible experience and I hate this, but then they find out that 4 other people in the group, it's the main thing that those folks find effective, it may not change that student's opinion. They may still not prefer what's going on. But now they know they don't represent the whole room. They represent maybe a small subset of students, and the rest of them are finding something very, very effective. So it's a way for the outliers to at least realize they're outliers. Another one that kind of comes up often is pace, right? I think that we need to slow this thing down. This is going way too fast. And somebody who disagrees, who thinks it really should be sped up, they're not going to argue to consensus on that. They're going to leave knowing, I wish this would go faster and I wish this would go slower. But now they've heard each other. And we also know whether 2/3 of the class thinks it should go faster or not. And so it at least buys the students into understanding kind of the dynamic that the TA is working with. So those are some real advantages of the small group. Obviously then it takes up 20 minutes of class time. And you have to make time for that. So that can be viewed as a cost that you pay for it. The alternative, going with something that's online, has the positive impact of not taking class time, and that has an almost one-to-one correspondence with students not doing it. So if you're going to do something online outside of class time, it's really important to motivate how important it is to you. That impacts the response rate. It's still a challenge. When you take class time, they know that it matters. When a TA does something online, the TA has a higher bar to kind of meet to say, I really will pay attention to this. But in general, any kind of mid-quarter feedback like that you're asking students to do outside of time, encourage your TAs that you're mentoring to let their students know that they care and that they'll use the information. Because there's kind of an incorrect myth on campus that this stuff doesn't matter. And if students feel it doesn't matter, that's why they don't participate in it. So it's kind of, you may be able to encourage your TAs to help convey that. And as I think our experience at CTL is we would even still say it's a challenge with online evaluations or external evaluations to get a very high response rate. So that's the downside there. The other potential downside is those are individual, so you're missing the conversation. So they're individual responses. That's really important to have a consultation with a new instructor. If they get 20 individual responses, and some say this and some say that, the typical thing is to not change anything, right? And it can be very difficult to decide what to change if they're getting conflicting individual feedback from students. So that's another place where you as a mentor can step in and help them kind of prioritize that feedback and decide how or what might be able to be done to move forward in a way that responds to it. We at CTL would say even if the TA creates his or her own form, does something completely independent, checking in with their students in some way at mid-quarter is hugely important. At the end of the term, they're most likely going to get some kind of formal feedback. The problem for most TAs is even if they do get good formal feedback at the end of the term, odds are they're not teaching that course again. So they don't even get a chance to practice implementing whatever they learned. They've moved on to something else. At mid-quarter, they get a chance to practice implementing what they've learned. And it obviously also has the huge benefit of the students get the benefit of their feedback as well, the learners in the room. So some kind of mid-quarter feedback we really strongly encourage. Those of you who were here yesterday, remember that we talked about this continuum of kind of comfort in your skin as a teacher and your concern about student learning. And one of the things that we suggested from the very beginning, even in survival mode, is to get this mid-quarter feedback. As we move this direction on that continuum, we talked about more options for informal, almost daily check-ins, other ways that you can help a TA know what's going on in class or not. And I think we have a minute or two at least. I would like to just hear some of your experiences, share with each other across the room. If you've seen somebody, either a professor or a TA, or you yourself have an effective strategy for getting a quick sense, is the pace right? Did they understand this? You know, should I be changing anything before tomorrow? If you have any strategies for that don't take a lot of time and they just kind of happen informally, I'd love to hear what some of them are. Paul?
What the physics department does for intro classes is all the TAs get sheets with the same questions. What were you supposed to learn in this section? What did you learn? Do you remember the other questions? I haven't taught the intro class in a while, but they have like a set like 3 questions and any suggestions at the bottom. So, and often students, you get to find out, did they get what you wanted them to learn? Like, did you agree with the students on what the main
So a
point
check
was?
at the end of section on what they took away, and the TA can then match that with what he or she hoped they took away. Okay, all right? Yeah, so physics has a formal set of questions they use. As you said, it takes a minute. There's a thing called a minute paper, and this is just a version of it, which at the end of class, the TA takes a minute or two and has the student jot down what were 3 big takeaways from today, what were the major points, or what's still muddy, what questions do you have at the end of today. You take a minute of time to do it, they turn it in anonymously, and you get a sense real quickly of, okay, we're on the same page. Or, holy cow, you know, I need to change something tomorrow because of the questions I'm seeing today. Other things you've seen people do effectively? Jordan?
When there's like a lot of either first or second year or third year grad students who are all teaching the same class and all teaching different sections of the same class, I found that just encouraging people to sit in on each other's sections. So like I would sit on my friend's section and they would sit on my section, and not even in a formal way, just to have them sit there and they can talk about it later, because I think a lot of times people just teach their section and they don't really know what's going on in other sections. And
So a couple of benefits there. By sitting in on someone else's class and just kind of shadowing, you yourself can be learning more about teaching just by watching somebody else teach. You may also be able to key into things that are going on with the students that the instructor may be missing. And so that might be another way to, if you invite someone into your class, to actually ask them as well, gauge the students. Help me know when they seem like this is working and not, okay? Catherine, you have one?
One format I like to use is I wish, what if, and I will do this sometimes with my students when I don't have time or resources to do other types of feedback, and so I model it for them by saying, this is what I like about our class, and I will throw one in, which is generally an easy one to get going, but I think when you're in the room, it's hard for them to critique you, so I will often throw in several I wishes about myself as well, or the class. And then what if is the opportunity for like, what would you do if you were in my situation? How would you make the class better? And it seems pretty casual and fun. And I try to encourage especially the I wish or what ifs.
Yeah. I like I wish. It's a great way to do this. Now that's going to take trust in the room, because you're asking your students to give you open, I wishes. And as you say, you spend some time actually developing an environment in which you think they can be comfortable doing that. Somebody else might feel that's a little bit too public and they might not hear from the students what they want. That's where you could reinforce it with a mid-quarter feedback session, right? couple more, yeah.
I just had a question for you. How often do you do that activity with your students?
I could do it more often.
Or
This-
or at what point in the quarter?
Past midway, generally, I think I find it's more genuine after we're all a little comfortable with each other. And I could see it maybe doing it more often than I have, but I tend to do it like once or twice.
I was just thinking, you could also do this in groups. And sometimes instructors ask me, I don't have the time, I don't want to do an SGE, and I suggest that they use the same questions, but they divide the students up into groups and have them brainstorm for a moment. And that way and ask them to prioritize. That way you already have clusters of comments that you can work with.
You're almost ready to shorten SGE then.
Yeah.
For yourself. But you can do it in just a few minutes after class and turn in the sheets or something.
So one question that comes up often that TAs will ask you, and you won't have an answer, at least I don't think you should be able to have an answer to it, an important question, and feedback might help, is they want to know about pace. Am I going too fast? Am I going too slow? Do any of you have strategies for quick checks with their students? Because when someone asks me as a consultant, how's the pace? I say, I don't know. What do your students say? Right? How I think the pace is irrelevant. What do your students say? So do you have strategies that you've seen where somebody can gauge pace real quickly?
I've seen it before with cups, like when they're full of they've got it. My cup is full. I don't need anymore. They just turn over the cup in front of them. So you have like a visual representation of how many more cups you need to fill up, and what's an appropriate level of cups to be filled when you're in the room.
I've never heard that in high school. That's literally having empty cups in the room that they start to turn over as they get too full. Okay, all right, that's a great one. Other ones?
I think it's easy just to talk to students in office hours. I mean, it's not a accurate representation of the class, but you're getting some casual feedback.
But take time in office hours to check with those coming to office hours how the pace of section is going. Yeah, Jesse?
Or like building on that, one thing that I kind of want to do is ask students at around midterm to just stop by office hours for a few minutes for a check-in, just for kind of an informal chit-chat.
Another way to get feedback. A couple of things I've also seen on pace that I think can be effective depending on the setting is, literally, who's with me? Raise your hand, Obviously, the opposite is not a good thing to do. Who's lost? They don't do that. But if you say, who's with me, and they're like, it's like, yes, the hands will just shoot up. Or you'll get the kind of waffle hands. Or you'll say, who's with me, and the hands are down. Right? You can tell instantly, You have to give them a little time to decide whether they know if they're with you or not. So that can literally be a quick gauge. The other thing to do about pace you might recommend to a TA in terms of short-term informal feedback is to pre-identify spots during the session to stop and let students reflect. So if you're talking, you stop talking. If they've been working in groups, you stop working in groups. You stop and you say, okay, take a minute and review your notes or look back over what we've been doing. What questions do you have? And let them stop and think about what their questions are. That helps break the pace, and it also gives you a sense of where are they.